Welcome to Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals, and Knowledge Partner host, Corporate Board Member.
Welcome to the second show of Governance Minutes. I'm your host today, Darla Stuckey, and with me is David Chun, founder and CEO of Equilar. We're very happy to have David here today.
Great. Thank you, Darla, for the opportunity to be here.
It's spring, certainly nice and warm in New York today, and we are going to talk about proxies and more specifically executive compensation. Equilar has some new tools for developing peer groups and pay-for-performance methodology. So we're going to hear about that in just a few minutes. But first I want to let David tell us a little bit about Equilar.
Sure. Thank you again, Darla, for the opportunity to be here. So Equilar, we've been around for 12 years. We've been tracking executive pay trends as disclosed by public companies and the proxies. We have about 100 companies headquartered out in Northern California, aggregating all the disclosed information around executive pay, and that could be anything from a proxy, from an AK filing, Form 4s and whatnot. And we've developed a benchmarking tool that's used throughout the industry, and that would include the institutional investor community. We have over 1,100 issuers using our services, the compensation consulting firms, and last but not least, the media. We've done the New York Times pay study for the last 5 or 6 years. We'll be doing that again this spring. And we like to see ourselves as the scorekeeper of executive pay. We don't take a position.
So you don't make recommendations?
No. So that's a very important distinction. I'm glad you brought that up. So what we do is we provide the raw underlying data and the analytics to help people make recommendations. That would be the advisors working with the board, or whether it's the HR departments or legal, the corporate secretaries, using our information to figure out what to specifically do. We're not making recommendations, nor are we making any judgment with regards to how pay is being delivered.
But you do have some sort of scoring, because there's a benchmark, so people might fall into a numbered
absolutely
score.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you can use the information to figure out percentiles and whatnot, but we're not necessarily out there saying whether to withhold or to vote in favor of certain proposals.
Okay, great. So turning again to executive comp and to the folks that are our members that have just finished their proxies, congratulations. And I know doing the summary comp table is one of the worst things. But before you even get to that, you have to pick peer groups, and typically compensation committees pick their peer groups, and for a variety of reasons, with a variety of factors. I heard one person say, there was a company that was very small, and they had a very large company in their peer group that wasn't even really in the same line of business, and they were challenged, and the person said, yeah, but they're down the street from us, and all of our talent goes to that company. So wherever you compete for talent or in business lines, the compensation committees will pick these kinds of companies. So tell me, what is... I know there's issues around it. Tell me what you've seen companies do and what some of the issues are and what Equilar's done.
Sure. As over the last couple of years, the SEC required, in the CDNA disclosure for companies to include which companies they've looked at with regards to how they benchmark the pay of their team. And needless to say, this is probably the most controversial area on executive pay, because if you're starting off with the wrong set of companies in your analysis, it doesn't matter the underlying numbers. And so, with regards to executive pay, you have numerous issues of that you need to consider when selecting that set of peers. And typically, most companies will have anywhere from 15 to 20 companies in their peer group, and that will obviously include factors like which industries you're competing in, geographical issues, the competition of talent that you just pointed out. If you're in Silicon Valley, you're a small little company, but you are competing against Google, Facebook, and others for talent. And then you have a whole host of other issues that you're facing, the stage of the business and whatnot. So this is an area that, as we all know, boards, management teams, executives, and their advisors are spending a tremendous amount of resources, putting a lot of thought into figuring out what is the appropriate set of companies we should be looking at with regards to pay.
Right. And we see, even after it's all done and after the proxy advisory firms have selected their own peer groups, we see people even doing supplemental filings now, challenging why you picked this one or why you picked that one. I know Qualcomm had an issue, and I think National Fuel Gas recently had an issue. Things like, don't put me with peers that have a certain market cap or have a certain kind of margin business because I'm different. So anyway, we've seen a lot of that. But tell me, So what is Equilar? I know you guys make peer groups now for all of our companies.
Yeah,
so tell me
what
is it?
Let's be clear about that. I want to be clear. We're not necessarily making peer groups.
Okay.
So what we are doing though is that there has been a lot of controversy, needless to say, like I touched on earlier, around peer group selection. So the companies will disclose based on the analysis that they've worked on with their outside advisors and the board and whatnot. They'll disclose a peer group. Proxy advisory firms will have their own set of peers, which often are inconsistent with what the company is disclosing, and that inconsistency will be due to the fact that the proxy advisory firms have a very fixed methodology using something called GICS, the Global Industrial Classification System,
an industry classification.
Yeah, and so there's a very fixed methodology that says, okay, based on your GICS category and revenue size and whatnot, we're going to come up with our own set of peers. So what ends up happening is that all the effort that the issuers had put together with their advisors to come up with a set of peers, that's all thrown out the window. And so now all of a sudden we're saying, okay, we're going to use this completely different set of companies, maybe some overlap between the two, but often not. And then to say, hey, based on that information, we're going to figure out, start to take the underlying pay data to come up with something. So as you pointed out earlier, Qualcomm, National Fuel Gas, Amgen, and others, we're seeing at least this year so far a significant increase in the number of companies providing a supplemental proxy disclosure where they are questioning some of the information that's being provided by the proxy advisory firms. And what we've done, so specifically, we've developed a tool earlier this year, our Pay for Performance tool, and the most very important factor in that, the tool that we've developed is helping identify a more appropriate peer group. And so,
yeah, go ahead.
And so what we do there is we take the company's disclosed set of peers. So we start with the company's disclosure.
Okay.
We then essentially we take every company's disclosed set of peers, and we've developed a massive network of all the peer groups. And what we've done is then we've connected all the companies that are disclosed and who includes each other in their peer group.
Oh, cool.
And so with that, what we're doing, so let's take an example, let's take Staples.
Okay.
So we'll look at Staples' peer group. And Staples will include somebody like an Office Depot in their peer group. Right. We'll then look at Office Depot, and then we look at their set of peers. And then we look at Office Depot's peers, and then we map those out. And then based on all the connections, we then come up with the most appropriate set of peers for Staples based on who includes each other in their peer groups.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's like crowdfunding meets 6 degrees of separation or something.
Exactly. So what it does is we're not making any judgments on how to create the peers. What we're doing, though, is that there's been a tremendous amount of information around peer groups that's already been disclosed. You have 3,000 companies. Every company has roughly about a 20 company set of peer group, and so then you can see, we can help validate or invalidate which companies are included in their peer group, and this helps issuers and the institutional investor community come up with a more appropriate set of peers.
Okay, so let me just stop you real quick. There are institutions or some folks, shareholders, would say companies manipulate their peer groups to give higher pay. Does this fix that problem?
Well, it absolutely does, in the sense that if that is the problem, and I'm not going to necessarily support that statement.
I understand.
So what it does is it validates that peer group. So all of a sudden, if companies like for example, take Equilar, if we all of a sudden included Walmart in our peer group, if Walmart is not looking at us as a peer, and Walmart's peers don't consider us a peer, I think that would that's a huge red flag right there. And so what it allows issuers to, investors and issuers, is that if you're selecting somebody as a peer, does the market data support your decision on that?
So it's market data driven.
Completely market data driven. So there's nothing with regards to our methodology. We're not putting, so if you're including a company that is much larger, but everybody else in your industry and others are including that as your peer group, then that would support including that in your peer group.
And what about the time frames? Do you do this on once a year for a specific year? Because I think peer groups change over time, but maybe they would change or wouldn't change based on
So what we're doing is when we're helping both our clients, the institutional investors, and the issuers, it is somewhat a moving target once you get into proxy season. So we fix the peer groups at the end of the fiscal year. So based on last year's disclosure, we're identifying which peers would show up within for a particular company. Once we get through proxy season, we'll have obviously a new set of data and then recalculate peer groups for companies at that point.
Okay, very interesting. Okay. And who's using this right now? Are any of the proxy advisory firms using this right now?
Yeah, so we launched the product at the beginning of the year. Our first client was the Council of Institutional Investors. As you know, the Council, their members include many of the large state pension funds and whatnot, represents over $3 trillion of assets. So they're a pretty influential group of individuals. And so a number of their members are using this as part of their, to help them in their SAMPay vote analysis. And then we also recently announced a partnership with Glass Lewis.
Oh, wow.
So Glass Lewis, one of the major proxy advisory firms, not using it for this proxy season. They're going through the beta testing right now, but once proxy season is through, we'll be starting this summer, including our peer groups actually in their methodology.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's quickly turn to the other side of it, or the rest of the model, which is the pay for performance. I know there's issues around the summary comp table and what's shown in a proxy versus what's really taken home by a CEO. And I think you've also got some solutions for that issue as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes. Up until recently, up until the past year, everybody was focused on the summary comp table number, and that would be the target pay. And that would look at...
Target meaning what the comp committee intended to give the executive if all goes well.
Exactly. So what they expect that package to be worth. And the most controversial piece of that would be the stock options.
The options, right.
And so the options are valued using Black-Scholes, but as we know, depending on the direction of the stock, those options could either be worth quite a bit of money or they could be worthless. And so a concept that has gained a lot of traction over the last year or so is this whole concept around realizable pay. What is the actual pay that is being delivered to an executive?
And does that mean how much the executive actually takes home, including, if he's exercised any options?
Yeah, so that's a great point. It's being called realizable pay.
Instead of realized.
Realized.
Okay.
So realized would be what they actually exercised that year, but often in that situation, those options that were exercised that year may be 8, 9, almost 10 years old when they're, because they're about to expire. So to kind of to include the actual exercises that year would actually miss. How would I describe it? Would not be an appropriate way to look at what pay was delivered over a certain time frame, unless you were looking at 10 years of pay. And so what we're looking at this year with realizable pay is looking at, let's say you go back over the last 3 years. Here are the equity incentive vehicles that were delivered. Or were granted, and based on how the stock has performed, what would be the theoretical value of what the executive could take home? So a very simple example would be, let's take an executive whose pay package was 100% in options, and so let's say every year, the comp committee was hoping to grant $1 million worth of options each year. So over 3 years, on a target pay example, you'd sum the three numbers up, and it'd be $3 million. But if there was let's say a geopolitical event or a collapse of some sovereign debt, where it was just completely out of the control of the executive, but all of a sudden the entire stock market was down 25–30%. So now theoretically, those options are worthless, right? Or the options, because they're so far out of the money, they're not. There's no value that the executive took home. So if you're looking at on a target pay example, you could say, well, the executive got $3 million. Well, if I'm the executive sitting there, I says, I'm not eating.
Show it to me. Show it to me.
And so that's the issue that you have with the target pay number. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be looking at target pay, but you should also be looking at realizable pay, because then you can see in that situation, even though the executive received quote unquote $3 million of options, really what he or she may have taken home was actually nothing in that situation.
We could talk about this for hours,
yes.
I know. But if our members or anyone else watching it wants to see how this works, what do they do?
Yeah, I mean, please have them contact us. We'd be more than happy.
And what is you, Equilar.com?
Yeah, just go info@equilar.com. We'll be able to find us there.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for watching Governance Minutes. Join us again next month on April 30th.
Join us again next time for Governance Minutes, brought to you by the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals and Knowledge Partner host, Corporate Board Member.